It was a Friday morning in Washington, D.C., and the East Room of the White House buzzed with press, staffers, and carefully positioned cameras. The administration had announced a youth policy forum, an obvious move to soften public perception after months of polling declines among younger voters. Karoline Leavitt, newly elected representative and conservative firebrand, had received a last-minute invitation, if it could even be called that. They said she could come, one staffer whispered to a reporter, but she's not speaking. Karoline knew the playbook. Invite her, sideline her, and let the media spin it as inclusion. But she didn't come to be silent. She stood at the back of the room, dressed sharply in a white blazer, Constitution folded neatly in her clutch, and a calm but firm expression on her face. The moment President Biden walked in, flanked by aides, cameras surged forward. He offered a hesitant wave and moved to the podium, squinting at the teleprompter. "We welcome the young voices of America here today," he began. "Even if some of them are still figuring things out." Karoline tilted her head slightly. He saw her. And he didn't like it. His tone shifted as he veered off script. "Some folks think waving the Constitution around makes them smart," he slurred. "You're just a kid." The room went quiet. Aides tensed. Cameras froze. Karoline didn't flinch. She stepped forward, no permission requested, and gently unfolded the parchment in her hand. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't yell. She simply said, "This kid came armed with the document you swore to defend." Gasps, flashbulbs. A ripple moved through the audience. And Joe Biden froze. Silence thickened in the East Room. For a few long seconds, the only sound was the quiet creak of Karoline unfolding the worn copy of the Constitution she carried in her bag, not as a prop, but as a principle. The cameras swiveled from the president to her like magnets. Biden, still gripping the podium, squinted again, but this time not at the teleprompter, at her. Karoline didn't wait for permission. She turned slowly toward the crowd of press, university students, and congressional aides, holding the parchment high. Her voice was clear, crisp, and unwavering. "This document doesn't discriminate based on age. It doesn't say, only speak when you're told. It gives every American, young or old, the right to speak truth to power. Even when power forgets what it swore to uphold." A low murmur rippled through the room. Biden attempted a chuckle, but it came out dry and unsteady. "That's cute," he muttered into the mic. "You think this is a TikTok debate?" Karoline's brow lifted slightly. "No, Mr. President," she said calmly. "I think this is the most powerful room in the world, and you just told an elected representative of the American people to sit down and shut up. That's not leadership. That's fear." Someone clapped. Then another. It wasn't a standing ovation. Not yet. But it was enough. The staffers flanking the room froze. Press scrambled for better angles. Even a few members of Biden's own party shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karoline didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every syllable landed with precision. "We're not here because of your invitation," she said. "We're here because we earned our voice, and I will not let you, or anyone in this room, pretend that silence is patriotism." Then, with one final look at the stunned president, she stepped back, not in retreat, but in declaration. The room had changed, and everyone knew it. Karoline stepped forward again, this time slower, more deliberately. The president remained still, caught between defensiveness and disbelief. The room braced. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a receipt, long, crumpled at the edges, but every line legible. She held it in the air, letting the audience take it in. "This is what your economy looks like, Mr. President," she began, voice low but rising with each word. "Bread, $4.79. Eggs, $6.12. Ground beef, over $8 for a single pound. A single mother in Ohio emailed me this last week. And do you know what she wrote at the bottom of this receipt?" She paused. The silence was deafening. She wrote, "I skipped dinner so my kids wouldn't." The press pool stopped typing. "And yet, you stand at that podium telling us the economy is strong," Karoline continued, now locking eyes with the stunned crowd. You slur a few lines about progress, but ignore the fact that Americans are working 2 jobs just to afford gas. You dismiss our voices as youthful noise while seniors dip into retirement just to survive. She slammed the receipt on the table beside her. It echoed, "This is not just a statistic. It's a reality, and your administration can't bury it with talking points." Biden blinked, visibly unsettled. For a moment, it looked like he was about to respond. But Karoline didn't give him the chance. "I came here because I was told my generation doesn't understand sacrifice. But I see it in every parent who skips meals, every young worker drowning in inflation, every retiree selling belongings to pay for insulin. Don't lecture us on what strength looks like, you're reading from a script. We're living the consequences." The tension in the East Room was now uncontainable. Even the Secret Service agents looked as though they were holding their breath. And in that moment, it was clear, Karoline Leavitt wasn't a footnote in Biden's event. She was the headline. President Biden's team tried to pivot. A White House aide whispered hurriedly into his ear, urging him to move forward with his prepared remarks. But Karoline was not finished, not when the American people still hadn't been heard. She walked toward the front of the room, slowly but confidently, heels clicking against the polished floor. In her hands now was a thick policy binder, one of Biden's own briefing books, conveniently left on a side table during the earlier chaos. She held it up with one hand. Then, looking directly at the cameras, she said calmly, "This is what they don't want you to read." With that, she flipped open the binder. Charts. Talking points. Handwritten notes. But none of it spoke to real people. No mention of the price of milk. No concern for rising rents. No solutions for the middle-class families caught between stagnant wages and exploding costs. Karoline tore a page from the binder. "This memo suggests that inflation has cooled off. That's not what I see when I walk into a grocery store." Another page. "This one outlines talking points on job creation, without a single mention of layoffs in Ohio, Pennsylvania, or rural Georgia." Another page. Another rip. Each tear was louder than the last. Each shred of paper, a rebuke. "I'm done letting you hide behind sanitized data while Americans beg for relief," she said, voice steady, rising. "You can dismiss my voice, mock my youth, but you will not ignore the truth." Reporters stood. Phones were lifted. The room was electric. Biden looked down at his podium, silent. Karoline turned to the crowd. "This isn't a stunt. This is a scream from every forgotten town, every overworked parent, every underpaid nurse, every veteran facing eviction. If this administration won't listen, then we, the people, will speak louder." With that, she placed the tattered binder at Biden's feet. And the room, left in silence, realized something. This wasn't just a young woman interrupting a speech. This was the truth, walking into the heart of the establishment, and tearing down the script. Biden cleared his throat, trying to regain the room. "Let's get back to the facts," he mumbled, voice trailing off under the weight of what had just unfolded. But Karoline wasn't finished, and the crowd knew it. She stepped toward the mic Biden had left behind. She didn't shout. She didn't raise a fist. She simply leaned forward and asked one question. "Mr. President, when was the last time you bought your own groceries?" Gasps echoed across the room. One journalist nearly dropped his pen. Biden blinked rapidly, taken off guard, not just by the question, but by the calm force behind it. "You talk about a strong economy while families are choosing between heating and eating," Karoline continued. "You say we're on the right track, but the only track we're on is the one leading straight into a brick wall." She held up a small, crumpled receipt. "This is from a mother in Iowa. Eggs, $6.29. Milk, $5.15. Bread, $4.02. This isn't Fox News. This is her reality. And while she clips coupons to survive, your administration prints money for pet projects and foreign entanglements. Biden tried to interject. We've created millions of jobs. Karoline cut in, without flinching. Created where, sir? For who? Because the factory workers in Pennsylvania haven't seen them. The truckers in Texas are drowning in diesel prices. The diner owners in the Rust Belt are closing shop, again. The room had shifted. Journalists no longer looked at Biden. Their cameras, eyes, and questions all turned to Karoline. You want to lecture me on leadership, she said, turning slightly toward the press. Leadership is not stumbling through speeches or hiding behind teleprompters. It's showing up, standing firm, and speaking truth, even when it's uncomfortable. She pointed to the seal on the presidential podium. That symbol means something. It's not just power, it's responsibility. To every struggling worker. To every forgotten town. To every American who's lost faith. A long silence followed. Then, slowly, Karoline took a step back, not because she was done, but because she had said enough, for now. Biden adjusted his collar, lips pursed. But in that moment, it didn't matter what he said next. Because America had already heard her. The silence in the press room was thunderous. Biden stared blankly at the crowd as if the teleprompter might rescue him. But there was nothing to read. No cue cards. No aides rushing in. Just the brutal weight of Karoline's words hanging in the air like a storm cloud no one dared to challenge. And Karoline? She didn't retreat. She walked straight toward the front row of reporters, locking eyes with each camera lens like she was staring down the American public, no filter, no spin. She reached into her bag and pulled out a thin binder. This, she said, holding it high, isn't my speech. It's your record. The label on the front read, Promises Made, Promises Broken. You said student loans would be erased. They weren't. You said the border was secure. It's a sieve. You said inflation was transitory. It's permanent pain. You said unity, then branded half the country extremists. Reporters flipped through their notes, some trying to frame a question before Karoline's fire consumed the entire room. But she wasn't done. You blamed grocery stores. Then oil companies. Then the meat industry. Then the pandemic. Then Putin. Then the weather. The only thing you haven't blamed, she said, pointing squarely at Biden, is yourself. Gasps again. But now they came with scattered applause, from staffers, aides, maybe even a few reporters who'd had enough of covering for a narrative they no longer believed. Biden chuckled nervously, stepping toward the mic. I've been in this game a long time, young lady. Karoline didn't flinch. That's exactly the problem, Mr. President. This isn't a game. She walked over, stood beside the podium, not behind it, and spoke directly into the microphone with her voice steady, sharp, and unshakable. Real leadership is not about how long you've been in Washington. It's about how willing you are to listen to those who haven't been heard. She tapped the binder again. Every broken promise in here represents someone's broken trust. That's not leadership. That's abandonment. And with that, she laid the binder flat across the presidential seal, stepped back, and folded her hands. Biden didn't speak. He couldn't. Not because he wasn't allowed, but because no one was listening anymore. Biden stepped back from the podium, visibly rattled, his handlers exchanging uneasy glances. The room was no longer under his control. Karoline had done something few dared. She stripped the illusion bare, right in front of the cameras. One reporter dared to shout, Ms. Leavitt, who exactly do you think you represent? Karoline turned toward the question without hesitation. Her eyes locked with the camera as if she knew the question wasn't just from a journalist, it was from the establishment itself. I represent the family who had to put groceries back at checkout last night. I represent the small business owner who laid off 2 employees just to afford the new gas bill. I represent the veterans who are tired of being paraded out every election and ignored every day after. Then, she slowly raised the binder again and flipped to a page marked with red tabs. These are emails. Real stories. Real people. One mother wrote, My son's lunchbox is filled with dollar store snacks, and I pray he doesn't notice what other kids have. She turned the page. A farmer in Iowa wrote, "Fertilizer prices tripled. My daughter's college dreams just evaporated." And another. A former Biden voter said, "I wanted normal. I got chaos with a smile." The room fell silent. Not out of politeness, but because the truth had become too loud to ignore. Biden forced a half-smile and stepped forward again. "With all due respect, Ms. Leavitt, you don't speak for the majority." Karoline didn't even blink. She turned fully to face him. "You're right, Mr. President. I don't speak for the media's majority, or the DC cocktail crowd's majority. But I speak for the forgotten majority, the ones you left behind the moment the cameras stopped rolling." She stepped forward, closer to the mic. "And let me tell you something. When inflation robs a paycheck before it's cashed, when crime walks free while parents stay locked inside, when the leader of the free world forgets his promises, someone has to speak. And if that makes me inconvenient," she paused. Then said clearly, "Good." The binder shut with a loud snap, and the echo of her final word hit harder than any speech. Even the president's staff didn't interrupt her. Some watched in stunned silence. Others turned away, trying not to be caught on camera witnessing the collapse of a narrative. Karoline didn't walk away from the mic. She stood there. Still, strong, unyielding. Because in that moment, it was clear. She wasn't waiting for permission. She was the permission. Karoline stood at the edge of the stage, the crowd still stirred from her last remark. She could feel the weight of the moment, not just in her bones but in the rising energy of the thousands packed into the room. Flashbulbs lit the hall like distant lightning, and yet all she heard was the low murmur of doubt seeded by Biden's earlier jab, "You're just a kid." But this kid wasn't here to play. She adjusted the microphone slightly and reached under the podium, her fingers brushing against the familiar navy blue leather of a document folder. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out a copy of the U.S. Constitution, frayed at the edges, pages marked by years of study, inked annotations, and folded corners. This wasn't a prop. This was her playbook. "Mr. President," she began, holding the document high, her voice like steel wrapped in silk, "you may think I'm too young to understand this, but this is exactly why I'm here. Because too many in your generation have forgotten what this means." A wave of murmurs surged through the audience. Phones rose. Live streams exploded. Karoline flipped the Constitution open to Article 1 and read aloud, "All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress of the United States." She paused. That means Congress, not executive orders, not unelected bureaucrats, and certainly not whispered deals behind closed doors. The room was silent except for the cadence of her words. Age doesn't determine conviction. Power doesn't guarantee wisdom. And experience means nothing if it's used to silence the people instead of serve them. Reporters exchanged glances. Staffers rushed to update headlines. One cheer-in on a national feed read, "Karoline reads the Constitution," crowd roars. She wasn't yelling. She didn't need to. Her clarity carried. Behind the scenes, aides to the White House were already panicking. Biden's line was meant to belittle. But Karoline had turned it into a national moment, a textbook case of political jujitsu. As she closed the folder, the camera zoomed in on her hands, now resting on the document like a pastor over scripture. "Don't confuse youth with ignorance," she said one final time before stepping back. "We're not here to wait our turn. We're here to take responsibility, because someone has to." The audience didn't erupt, they stood. Slowly. Together. Applauding not just her words, but the audacity to speak them in a time where silence was safer. And Karoline knew, Biden had underestimated her for the last time. The White House press room buzzed with agitation. Screens flickered with clips of Karoline's speech, anchors playing the footage on loop, breaking down every syllable as if it were Supreme Court testimony. But Biden's team was reeling. The president had tried to dismiss her with a wave of the hand and a tired jab, "You're just a kid." Now that line was being framed on t-shirts and plastered across every conservative influencer's feed, juxtaposed with Karoline holding up the Constitution like a torch. Inside a DC strategy meeting, one senior advisor muttered, "She flipped the whole narrative in under 5 minutes." Another simply nodded. They all knew the truth: she wasn't running from Biden's insult. She'd weaponized it. Meanwhile, Karoline was backstage in a quieter room. The door was closed. The applause had long faded. Now came the strategy. Her chief of staff laid down an iPad showing poll spikes from independent voters and a rapidly growing subscriber list. Her name was trending #1 on X. "Karoline," he said, "that moment went global. Even some left-leaning pages are calling it undeniably bold. You've just turned Biden's ageism into a generational rallying cry." She didn't smile. She wasn't in this for likes. Karoline leaned forward. "Good. Now let's make sure they know it wasn't just a speech. We need action." She pulled out a stack of drafted proposals from her leather folder, bills her team had been preparing for months but waiting for the right moment. Now was that moment. One focused on executive overreach, another on preserving institutional integrity from partisan abuse. Each designed to contrast with the stagnation and hypocrisy Karoline believed Biden's administration embodied. Later that evening, as the press begged for a follow-up interview, Karoline walked to the cameras, this time without a podium, no mic clipped to her lapel, just her voice. "I was told I'm just a kid," she said. "But let me be clear. If understanding the Constitution, defending free speech, and standing for the forgotten American makes me naive, then I welcome the insult. Because the people calling me just a kid have spent 40 years in office and still haven't fixed a damn thing." She stared straight into the lens. "You had your time. Now, step aside. A new generation is rising. And we're not here to wait quietly." The clip went viral before she left the parking lot. The nation had watched the clip on repeat. Cable networks scrambled to fact-check Karoline's words, but the damage was already done. She wasn't aiming for their approval, she was aiming for the American people. And she hit her mark. But Karoline wasn't finished. That weekend, she flew to Pennsylvania, one of the hardest-hit states by inflation and overregulation. She didn't arrive with a security convoy or a pre-cleared press pool. She landed quietly, walking into a veterans' town hall with nothing but a manila folder in hand, the same one she'd held up after Biden's condescending remark. Inside, families were seated shoulder to shoulder. Retirees. Single mothers. Factory workers. Forgotten by DC, but remembered by her. She didn't start with pleasantries. She stepped to the front, unfolded a sheet of paper, and read. Article 1, Section 9. No money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriations made by law. Then she raised her eyes. You see, Washington forgot that every dollar they spend is your labor. Your gas money. Your grocery bill. Your sacrifice time with your kids. Applause erupted. Karoline pointed toward a mother in the third row holding a toddler. They said I was just a kid. But I'm standing up because no one else will fight for your kid. The one whose future is being stolen by a system that tells them they owe everything to government, and nothing to themselves. She placed her folder on the table and opened it to reveal printed screenshots. Quotes. Policies. The actual grocery bill she had held on stage in D.C., now annotated in red. They told you the economy was strong. That this inflation was transitory. That our institutions were just fine. But what they really meant was they're fine. They meant they have driver security, insider stocks, and government pensions. While you scramble to afford eggs and gas. Cameras weren't rolling. This wasn't performance. It was the clearest form of leadership, showing up. As she ended her remarks, a Vietnam veteran stood, his voice cracked but steady. They can say whatever they want, Miss Leavitt. But you did what we fought for. You spoke freely. And you told the truth. Karoline nodded. And I'll keep doing it. Not because I want power, but because I've seen what happens when people who hate accountability keep it. As she exited, reporters rushed to get comments. She didn't stop. But one microphone caught her words. You don't need a title to fight for this country. You just need courage and a backbone. And I've got both. And with that, she walked into the crowd, not behind a motorcade, but through the people. Just as she always promised. In America, when they take your voice, they take your freedom. I didn't speak today just for myself, I spoke for every forgotten American who's been told to sit down and stay silent. They can mock me, ignore me, try to shut me out. But they cannot silence the truth. And we're just getting started.